Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
Hello, and welcome to the Polygamer podcast, episode number 41, released on Wednesday, April 13th, 2016. I'm your host, Ken Gagney. Today I'm chatting with Adelle Lin, directing member of the Code Liberation Foundation. Hello, Adelle.
Hi, Ken. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
No, thanks for inviting us. This is really great to have a chat with you.
Yeah, well, as we just mentioned off the air, the Code Liberation Foundation has been on my list of Polygamer guests to get for at least 2 years, ever since before the show even founded, so I'm thrilled to finally have a representative on the show. That's completely my fault that it's taken me this long to get you on the show. But for those who are not familiar with the organization, tell us a little bit about what exactly the Code Liberation Foundation is.
So maybe I'll start off with our mission, because what the Code Liberation Foundation tends to change and morph a little in terms of what the situation is and who members are, but our mission is something that we really stand by. And so the Code Liberation, we catalyze the creation of digital games and creative technologies by women, non-binary, femme, and girl-identifying people to diversify STEAM fields. Generally, how that translates is usually we do a series of classes, workshops, game jams, and events that are mostly women only. Some of the nights that we do, like board game nights, those are for all genders and non-gender exclusive. But in an educational setting, we like to create a women-only safe space to teach women programming and game design and game systems thinking.
And is that motivated by traditional programming spaces not necessarily being safe spaces for those who identify as women?
Yeah, I mean, so you might have heard people talking about this thing called stereotype threat. And a lot of the times when women are placed in a room with men, there sort of is this kind of like pressure to, seem like the smartest person in the room, just because, there's an assumption that women aren't good at math, or women aren't good at physics, or women can't do programming. And so creating a space where that is taken away, or that pressure is taken away, is something that we kind of really aim for, and allowing people to ask, the so-called stupid questions, or, not worrying about how you're going to appear. And we find that when women are put in a room with other women or women identifying people, they feel a little bit freer to just express whatever they're thinking or feeling. And that also becomes part of the learning process.
That pressure to perform when you're the only woman in a room full of men, would you say that pressure originates both internally and externally?
I would say it definitely does appear across both spaces. And like sort of speaking from personal experience, I was born in Singapore and I grew up in Malaysia, and born into a Chinese family. The immediate assumption was, or it was immediate disappointment to like my grandparents that, I was a female as opposed to being a male. And traveling through that sort of education system in Asia, there's this assumption that girls just don't do math or science. And most of my friends, and kind of a different system for us, like sort of when you get to, I think it's like 9th grade, you pick whether you go into a science or art stream. And immediately, most of my friends moved into the art stream, and I was kind of like one of the few women in my group to move into a science stream. And that was just something that is not expected, or it's almost kind of, out of the ordinary. So from that age, I already kind of felt that external pressure. And I guess going into the workforce, kind of in different fields, there's different types of pressure and different expectations. And that kind of, I guess that gets inbuilt from you, and that fear kind of goes with you through life. And so sometimes it's kind of sometimes it gets reinforced by, like just small things, but because you already have that, you feel like you have that expectation of what people think about you, that tends to also amplify, I think.
Yeah, and those are some long-standing myths that you have to battle and challenge. 25 years ago when I was in grade school, I was taught by a teacher in the classroom that boys are better at math and girls are better at arts and reading, for example. Even as recently as 10 years ago, that was a myth put forward by the president of Harvard University, Larry Summers.
Yeah.
It's impressive that this myth continues to perpetuate itself. Even on this very podcast, I had a guest on the show, and I asked him why there aren't more women in game development spaces. And he put forth the theory that it's because they're just not interested. He doesn't feel the need to challenge that, which is disappointing.
Right. And I think, yeah, I mean, obviously you would be more interested in something that you feel that you're going to excel at, because I'm also reading a lot of stuff about Gen Y and millennials and sort of like the expectation, sort of like the career expectation curve that, that we have at this point. And, you want to be doing things that you feel like you're going to be excelling at, you're going to be valued. And if you have this perception that you're not going to be valued before you even start something, then why go down that road? And so it just becomes this vicious cycle of that just sort of like discourages women from going into traditionally male-dominated fields. And, tech and games just happens to be one of them that we're talking about right now. But it's still something that, even when I talk to people in theater and music production, audio engineering, like those myths are there, even though, creative arts is something that's been around for a lot longer time, and you see women all across those spaces. But still, there's all kinds of, gender discrimination that's happening. So it's, definitely something I think that comes from early age education, which is so amazing right now that there's so much focus on getting women and minorities into technically sort of male, white-dominated fields. So I think there's a really great opportunity for us in like 20 years' time that we're going to see a much more diverse and much more inclusive space. But yeah, I guess we're kind of talking about battling those things like right here and right now, which are, in a way, a product of bad, crazy thinking started 20 years ago.
Right. We're still early in the podcast, and we're sort of jumping right into big topics. I'll scale it back in a minute, but since we're on the topic of these vicious cycles, I'm curious if the games development industry is traditionally male-dominated, and there is pressure on marginalized voices to be the best that they can be, and those in spaces that are traditionally not very welcoming to those marginalized voices. Certainly giving them the skills and the confidence at an early age, like the Code Liberation Foundation does, is essential, but it doesn't necessarily change the market that these young women are entering. So how do you break out of that cycle if you're giving them the skills they need to enter into a workforce that does not want them there?
Yeah, that's always like the interesting question to ask, right? And to think about shifting. And, a lot of times, and this is sometimes where I think like men really need to step up. Also, because when you talk to a lot of sort of men in these roles or these industries, and like you said, it's more about their awareness and their perception of what women want to be and where they want to be, right? So if a CEO of a corporation or, of a university program thinks that women aren't interested, then it's not so much about whether they think women are capable. They're just not even thinking about women as an audience or a demographic that they should be, including. And a lot of that is really about shifting mentality. And something interesting that kind of came up at a Intel-sponsored hackathon that we had a couple weeks ago, we were fortunate enough to speak to one of the Intel fellows, Amber Huffman, and she brought up this function, which talks about, function of being successful as a woman in technology consists of confidence multiplied by competence multiplied by persistence. Two of those things that you touched upon. And maybe I could talk a little bit about persistence here, because that's something that we don't often talk about. We talk about being confident and having the skill set, but then just having that and then going into a place, you're often going to feel rejected. And there's so many stories about women sort of leaving fields because, they felt discriminated against or they felt like it wasn't their place. And it really is that persistence that needs to kind of be there in order for women to kind of like hold their ground. So the women that have held their ground and who've stayed in the industry, for like 20 years or so are now kind of seeing the benefits and are sort of seen as pioneers in the industry. And what Code Liberation hopes to do is to kind of be that, I guess, backbone or space where women can kind of come back to and kind of retool, find mentors or even just sort of relate to one another and to fuel up and to be able to go back out into the battlefield and sort of keep going. And I think the other interesting thing that just sort of came to mind, a lot of these men that are in these high-powered positions, most of them are dads, and most of them will have daughters. So, in a way, by empowering their daughters have the first-hand ear of their fathers. So, by shifting the mindset and empowering their daughters, in a way, that's a direct route into shifting the behavior and mindset of, men in these positions. So that's kind of one thing. And I know a lot of men get surprised by their daughters and sort of have, shifted their thinking because of, wanting their daughters not to be discriminated against and wanting them to become powerful individuals. And sometimes it doesn't make that immediate connect to how they treat their employees, but I feel like that could be like one way in. And also, I think sometimes men they feel like if they speak out for women's rights, they're going to be discriminated against as well. And so we also need to be thinking about ways to empower men to feel safe to speak about their beliefs and to speak out about women's rights. And that's another thing that we often forget to think about. And I think there was a campaign last year or a couple years ago about men for women.
He for she.
He for she, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and that's still out there. You can find it at heforshe.org. And I think it's a great example of the necessity of allyship in this battle, because the marginalization of women is literally a man-made problem.
Yep.
And it's not fair to expect those who are being affected by this problem to also be the ones to fix it.
Exactly. And I mean, obviously, once those barriers are crossed, it just makes for a much more enjoyable space to work together and collaborate.
Of course. This is the problems that affect women don't affect only women. Feminism is about improving things for everybody. So those are some great examples and some great approaches to addressing these issues. Let's back it up a little bit. How did you get involved in the Code Liberation Foundation?
So I arrived in New York. Sort of like comes to, I've only been in New York for maybe a couple of years now, probably. I have come here a couple of times before that, but I was living in Australia before this. So I grew up in Asia, went to Australia, got my tertiary education there, and sort of moved over to New York a couple of years ago. And I was involved in the independent game scene in Melbourne, Australia, which is like a wonderful place and very creative.
It is. I spent a semester there.
Oh, awesome. Which school?
Actually, I was working for the Scientific Services Laboratory, part of the Australian Government Analytical Laboratory.
Oh, wow.
So sort of an internship, yeah.
Yeah. So you would have got some great insights.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a great part of the world to be in. I'd love to go back.
Yeah, so kind of being part of that, and then when my friends so I guess the games and technology scene mostly lives on Twitter and the internet. So in a way, kind of moving countries sometimes it's easier in these fields because you already know who the people are. But yeah, so my friends in Melbourne kind of knew a lot of people in New York, and they were like, "Oh, you need to this and do this." And the way I met the CLF through, I guess, one of its founders, Phoenix Perry, and on my second week here, I kind of became part of the Different Games Conference, which is a conference that's happening actually this week. What do you call it? We're on the next weekend after this weekend, like April.
Yes, April 8th to 10th. I went last year.
Cool. Yeah. So I had applied. So before I came, I had applied to be part of the arcade, and one of the games I made became part of the arcade. So sort of in my second week, I was like right in NYU Magnet and just like right in the heart of the marginalized indie game scene, which is like a super interesting place to be. And I spoke to Phoenix, and she played my game, and we actually started talking about a collaboration sort of shortly after. And through that work, I became, she encouraged me to come to co-liberation classes and kind of did that. And also through our work, we just sort of became increasingly close. And then when she left, she left for Europe, and then now she's in London. We talked about me joining the co-liberation, and it was something I was really excited to do. And so I kind of got voted in, and it's probably maybe about a year ago now. But yeah, I would say that's sort of how I got in, or that's how I got involved. So first as a student, and then more as a organizational member.
So are you actually in the classroom working with the young women?
Yeah, so I teach classes, and also, so we teach a variety of classes, I would say. We teach, so the way we look at it, we kind of look at the collaboration facilitates the creation of games and artistic projects, and we teach programming as a means to an end to give artists and designers the skills they need to get kind of up and running easily. And we focus on tools that allow for this, sort of like so processing, P5, open frameworks, Unity, and which allows for all kinds of different types of teachers and, I guess, game libraries and frameworks to be taught in our classes. And so we teach classes. So you usually have a leader and a TA in a class, and so we kind of perform both these roles. And also then we run events on the side. I wouldn't say on the side, but we usually run events to showcase some of the games that people have made or to create new games. And we're also kind of looking at events that are more based around maybe sort of like an arcade structure. And we're hoping to apply for a few grants and to be able to commission games to be made. So a lot of this is an evolutionary process for us, as we've recently become a nonprofit, only sort of early this year. So we got our 501c3 approved, and that's really exciting for us because that allows for the organization to become sustainable and to grow.
Excellent. And what sort of classes do you teach? Is it C++, Unity, Maya?
So I teach, I've been teaching P5, which is which is from the Processing Foundation, but it's more for the web, and it's based on JavaScript. And I think that's like a really wonderful tool, especially for prototyping, because it's so quick and easy for you to have something that you can demonstrate. And so a lot of times, a lot of people that come to our classes have never done programming before, and sometimes it's kind of daunting. We have taught Unity classes, and I think we're going to be teaching some over the summer. But if we're doing one-off classes, Unity becomes a very tricky thing because it's not just a setup and run sort of situation, whereas P5 is something you can kind of like type into a browser and type into your programming IDE, and then you can have that running in a browser, and you can send that around and immediately get feedback. And one of the important things about making games is, as you know, would be playtesting. And so we're kind of always looking for ways for people to have something made. So we usually want to be able to have girls walk away with a game made by the end of the class, which they can then build upon and, show and get feedback straight away. And also another class, which I had fun teaching, was a processing class, but using this platform that a friend of mine, Trammell Hudson, had created the hardware for, which we are able to send processing sketches to a vector oscilloscope screen. And that has been super fun. So creating sort of like asteroid clones and stuff like that. And we taught a class around making simple processing games and kind of having that shown on like a vintage game screen. So that was fun. So kind of things like that.
If the goal of the CLF is to teach young women to program, why choose the genre of games specifically and not, for example, web development?
Well, so the collaboration was basically founded by, I guess, women in the game scene, and out of their frustration sort of at being at GDC and, other conferences like PAX, and sort of finding very few women on panels or talking about their games that they're making. And I've even had conversations with women gamers who are like, I can't get my girlfriends to play games with me because they're worried that they don't know how to play or they're not going to be good at it. And so we've sort of come from that area of frustration, particularly around, and there are a lot of women who do want to work in the games industry, and even though there's not such a big one in New York, there is a need to we found a need to get women just into making games and sort of being able to express their own narratives. And games are a great way to express narratives and to get people to understand, I guess, issues that generally aren't so easily seen. That's kind of one of the reasons why the collaboration was founded, generally to get women into the field of games. And I guess there are a lot of organizations out there that teach women to code specifically, and it's not. And so we kind of feel like, so one, wanting to get women the confidence to just be part of games in all kinds of ways. And then two, a lot of women that have come into our classes, so like JavaScript is something that you would use for web development. C++, again, for, other sorts of programming facilities. So it's more about just getting women into being comfortable with programming, and then being able to take it to that next level or apply for computer science courses or, boot camps and stuff like that. And so we definitely don't feel the need to be providers of everything to do with programming, but the idea is just to get women comfortable and confident in programming, and then kind of figuring out where they want to be and kind of going into that more in-depth, educational environment to become experts in those fields. And I would say the third thing is that teaching people to program through games is actually, it makes it very much more approachable because people understand what a game system is. And when you can use those as like starting building blocks, it becomes a lot easier to get programming concepts like loops and functions when they can immediately sort of see what they're making. Like if you want to create loops and you teach people to make bullets or things that you pick up, and it sort of becomes a more tangible way of explaining programming concepts, and we find that that's kind of worked really well.
You had mentioned that they might move on to take computer science classes. About 12 years ago, I spent a couple years as a high school English teacher, and at this particular school I worked at, which was a charter school for math and science, there was computer science. It was a required class for all the 11th graders to take. I don't know if that's typical of high school education in other parts of the world and various districts, but does the Code Liberation Foundation offer a resource that students aren't getting in their own schools?
We've actually worked with this initiative called Tech Kids Unlimited for the last couple of years, teaching high school students programming. And I do know there's sort of other supplemental programming classes like Script Ed, and they're also targeted towards high school students. So it kind of, I guess I haven't really been part of the high school education system here, but it seems to me that it probably isn't being taught enough at schools or to the level that is necessary, which is why all these other groups have been formed. And for our core audience, so I guess backtracking a little, we were founded out of a program at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. The Integrated Digital Media Program has been super generous in helping us get started. They provide a space for us to teach classes and 30 laptops and IT support in getting sort of any program that we need up and running on the computers, which allows us to reach a wider audience that maybe don't have laptops or things like that. But I guess, so in a way, our audience has always started from that sort of like tertiary and kind of like after work groups. And these are people who are kind of like finding that maybe they're in arts or, they want to learn a different type of programming language. And so they've kind of come to our classes. And then, so that's kind of been what we would normally focus on. But then we also run game jams. And so such as the Gamerella Game Jam that we did with Black Girls Code. That was for high school students from the ages 16 to 18. We're also talking about running something with the new museum, so around high school students. So it is something we do, but not, I guess, so much on a regular basis anymore.
And how does Code Liberation Foundation distinguish itself from other organizations? You mentioned Black Girls Code. There is also Girls Make Games, App Camp for Girls. So there are a lot of groups out there focusing on slightly different aspects of a larger issue. What distinguishes Code Liberation Foundation from those?
I guess maybe it's just maybe it's the audience that kind of comes to us, that we reach out to. With Black Girls Code, I guess they're focusing on sort of like programming for, I guess, the maybe like the more a broader programming base, and they're specifically for African American communities. And so we have that sort of overlap, and we work with them on a lot of projects, and we're sort of like friends with a lot of the teachers in there. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I just say we're just covering as much ground as we all can. There's just so many people to reach. So I don't know. I kind of never really think about how we are distinguishing ourselves from them. It's just more like the more people out there doing this, the more people we can get into seats and into classrooms and onto the computer.
Certainly, geography is one of the things that distinguishes them. It looks like App Camp for Girls. I'm on their website. They have events coming up in Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, Phoenix, etc. Your organization is primarily in New York City. Is that correct?
Yes. And those groups are mainly around high school students. And they're very kind of tailored towards like being a camp, like getting together and doing it for a week. I think Girls Make Games are also kind of like, they have a very intense sort of like weekend workshop sort of situation, which I think it's actually quite a good model, and we definitely are thinking about doing, concentrated session. But we do want to have things that are running throughout the year, and for it to be about creating a community and having that sort of mentorship and that sort of seeing the regular faces and knowing who's in your community, and that's an important part of what we do. And I can't speak for those organizations in terms of how they community build.
Does the Code Liberation Foundation have any representation outside of New York City, for example, at events like GDC?
Yeah, so we had panels at GDC, PAX, Amaze, Indiecade, Games for Change, TEDx, Open Hardware Summit, different games, Comic-Con, Montreal Games Summit, and we've hosted events we've hosted workshops actually at Killscreen's 256 conference, and Indiecade at Gamerilla, and PAX as well. So, we've definitely tried to attend as many of the events as possible, and we want to get more involved by curating arcades and having more of a women-focused space within these events. And we're also looking at, so with one of our founders being in London, we're looking at how we can create like a collaboration in London. And we've been talking to a few people. Every time we go to an event across the country, people want to start up a chapter there or something like that. And so that's definitely something we're working towards now that we've become a nonprofit. What's the right model that we could then, I don't want to say franchise, but, that we can then kind of like share on and kind of build grassroots movements in different cities. So that's definitely something on our radar. And so if anybody is in a different city and wants to talk to us about starting a Code Liberation there, please reach out.
Excellent, and there will be links in the show notes on how to do that. I think it'd be great to see the Code Liberation Foundation in other parts of the country, because there is such a need to offer these services to people from a variety of backgrounds and geographic backgrounds especially. And for example, I can tell you where in Boston to go because that's where I am. In New York City, I can point people to the Code Liberation Foundation. Somebody who's in Fargo or Houston or Boulder, Colorado, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know where to send them. And it'd be great if I could just say, oh, go to the Code Liberation Foundation. They have a camp somewhere near you.
That would definitely be something that we would love to do. It's such a geography, and I find like with community building, sort of being physically there is such an important thing. And I've kind of been part of like building all kinds of different communities, and it really does come down to regular meetings and just sort of like having someone else there you can physically talk to, because even though you can have communications over the web, you just like one face to face for like half an hour, and that that solidifies things almost immediately. And so, we would love to just meet different people in the cities who would love to do that, and sort of be able to have them kind of represent us, and that would be amazing.
Sure. Online courses are a powerful tool that have opened up resources to so many people that didn't have them before, and networking opportunities online, such as on Twitter, are a great way to introduce yourself to professionals, create these networking opportunities, and even get jobs. But those are a complement, not a substitute for real-world interaction. And for those who need that local networking, or for those like me who just learn better in a structured classroom, the Code Liberation Foundation serves a very important need.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
You mentioned that the Code Liberation Foundation classes are not, for example, 1 week intensives like some of the other camps offer. What is the structure that it takes? Does it follow the academic year where students take a class from September to June and then they graduate?
No, so we do we tend to do classes on a weekly basis. And so if we have a program that, so for example, we ran a C++ program that ran for about 8 weeks last year, and also sort of like a JavaScript one that ran for 8 weeks. And so those would be sort of once per week. And also we feel like with our audience, it is like they all, especially in New York City, you just like have to have a job or like, you're involved in a million things. So having intensive periods are kind of tricky to actually get people together, unless, it's specifically like a boot camp or something like that. So we want to provide something that people can kind of have just as a supplement to their daily lives, almost like, like going to the gym. So yeah, we kind of run those either as like 1 or 2 week workshop 3-hour sessions, or, kind of like a more involved, like 8-week program.
As we started the discussion, you said that these workshops and classes provide a safe space for women, and it eliminates a lot of the pressure that they may experience in other environments. I've had on this podcast representatives of female-friendly social spaces like the Sugar Gamers in Chicago or the Lady Planeswalker Society, originally out of Seattle. Their goal is not necessarily to create a group for women, but a group that is safe for women, which means that all genders are welcome as long as they respect that this is a safe space for women. If a young man wanted to take a class at the Code Liberation Foundation, what would the response be?
We've had that happen quite a lot, actually, which is really flattering and super sweet. And we have had some persistent men who have emotively presented that we are also doing some sort of discrimination against men by not allowing them into the class. But generally, we have to really respectfully say no, because we have found that just by virtue of having men in the room, that does create a little bit of a threat for women. And we don't exclude men from our lives at all. We're not a women-only collective that only kind of associates with women. It's more that in the classroom situation, we just want to carve out a 2 or 3 hour space where in a way gender falls away and we become all, women just sort of become the individuals that they are, and then they become marked by their experiences and expertise, and the question of gender sort of doesn't really kind of come up. And we do feel that it's hard to, it's really hard to screen. I would find it hard, say, for a one-off class to be able to screen who of the men coming to the classes would provide a safe environment. I think it becomes a much more difficult thing to enforce. So yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of that sort of stereotype threat that we found just by virtue of having men in the room. So, and there are not many spaces where it can just be women only. And we found the response from participants is that does make a big difference. So it's not in any way any form of discrimination on our part. It's just sort of, we just find it's a kind of like a necessary thing.
No, I totally get that. And I've had Sean Alexander Allen on the show as well. He's in the New York City area. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's talked about providing access to programming resources for individuals who are marginalized not based on their race, at least superficially, but on their socioeconomic status, which transcends gender.
Yes.
And so there's certainly a need for the resources of the Code Liberation Foundation for a variety of demographics. I agree that you need to limit your scope in order to be effective. It's just that it's so challenging because you want to help everybody, but when you try to help everybody, you end up helping nobody.
Focus, I think, is something very important for an organization that is, I guess, in a way involved in the sort of like activism space. Because if you try to sort of reach out to everybody, then you kind of lose the power of a strong voice. And which is why it's important to have so many different organizations and so many different voices around the same issue and the same cause, but then providing resources for that particular demographic, whatever it may be. And so what we would like to do is work together with these organizations and kind of, maybe run events together. And, they, in a way, like they can vouch for their members, we vouch for our members, and we can kind of create safe spaces together. But we found that just sort of having a strong narrative around who our audience is and who are the people that we're creating the safe space for makes it easier for us to reach a wider group of people within that, I guess, narrower band, which really isn't that narrow.
No, I can imagine that there are, even within your focus area, a lot of people who still need the resources of the Code Liberation Foundation. Do you ever need to turn people away because classes are overflowing?
I guess we sell our tickets through Eventbrite. So generally we kind of like, I guess when we reach the numbers and the ticket sales stop happening, we do have people who've approached us, if the classes are, supposedly full, and then we just sort of, invite them to come along anyway, because oftentimes, some people don't show up, or people sort of at the last minute say, oh, we can't, we need to offer up our tickets. So yeah, generally we feel like we're able to get everybody who wants to come to the classes.
That's awesome. And going back on the question of limiting your scope, does the gender restriction apply to the instructors as well?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I guess if there are sort of like specific topics that are very specialized, and if there aren't any women that we can find within that, we have talked about potentially having men teach those classes, but that sort of hasn't really kind of come up yet.
You'll burn that bridge when you come to it, as I like to say. Yeah. So the Code Liberation Foundation is about 3 years old. It's experienced some great growth and exciting developments in that time, including, as you mentioned, in the past year, becoming a 501c3. Mm-hmm. What are some other ways in which the Code Liberation Foundation has evolved or changed in that time, perhaps to respond to needs that it previously didn't recognize? So
I guess, some of the things that we're 3 years and 2 months old, so we're kind of a little grown up. Some of the co-founders are now advocates for us, and they've moved on. One of our founders, as I mentioned, Phoenix Perry, she's in London now, and so there have had to just be many changes in that regard. And one of the focuses that we have now is how to evolve into a financially stable position. And there will be a lot more of these challenges to come. And also, I think in the last year, it's been interesting. We've had I don't want to mention Gamergate too much, but like as a fallout for that, there have been a lot of harassment issues towards our members that we faced, and so that has thrown quite a bit of a challenge towards our organization. And for us, it's been pushing through issues like that. But we're sort of like very focused on our mission to catalyze digital games and the creating creative technologies by women, and also in a way we've also looking at the definition of who can come to classes has shifted a little bit, and even with the terminology and language that's being used out in the media, it used to be kind of it was like women and women identifying, and now we've kind of expanded it to non-binary, femme, girl identifying, and even whether it's STEM or STEAM or STEAAM is something that we're constantly discussing around our agendas and our mission. So I would say, like, we're fortunate to be in that position to be able to be having these discussions now, and to know that the directions that we're going in is something that's going to be constantly evolving, and to be able to have a structure that allows for that. I think that's something that's very important to a growing organization. And then also looking at what types of grants that we'd be able to qualify for, and strategic partnerships with different corporates or different hardware companies or different software companies are things that we're looking at as well, providing some sort of certification for certain types of programming skill sets or something that we're looking towards as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking at right now and kind of putting into place.
When I was putting together the outline for this podcast episode, one thing that didn't even cross my mind, which maybe it should have, because it was one of the things that prompted me to launch Polygamer in the first place, was harassment, which you just mentioned. And maybe it shouldn't, but even in this day and age, I find it shocking that an organization that's trying to do such good work and such foundational work for such a young demographic as the Code Liberation Foundation would have to put up with that bullshit. I mean, what does that even look like? When are you talking about harassing tweets? Do people show up with to create a picket line outside your classes?
No, unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And also, I think it's the function of NYU's security system. You just can't probably get up if you have like a large picket sign on your back. And no, we haven't had that physical harassment in that way. I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but our members have definitely faced a lot of online harassment. There's been some doxing and family members of some of our members. And so that has been something that in a way it's been quite a difficult thing to deal with, because on one hand, it's a very difficult thing for the individuals. And then two, it brings spotlight to the organization in a way that, other members don't feel comfortable with. And especially with having marginalized people in the organization who don't have, financial security, that sort of attention is really negative, and kind of sometimes it makes people fearful of being part of an organization that, maybe has that sort of attention. So we've been really careful to try and isolate from those situations and be political and be activists through what we do in terms of providing classes and providing that safe space, but trying not to be political in a way where we are directly fire against fire in those situations. So yeah, it's definitely something, a really delicate situation that we've discussed a lot within internal channels about how we address and what level of actual speaking out does the organization do apart from its members.
It's awful that you have to put up with that, but it shouldn't overshadow the great work that you do. You had mentioned wanting to create arcades at various events that represent the Code Liberation Foundation. Would that consist of games that have come out of your organization?
Yeah, so that would potentially be part of, I think it would probably be a mixed sort of effort. And we're also, again, something that we're discussing, sort of one being a curatorial thing and being able to help promote games that are already out there. We'd definitely be interested in commissioning games. And then we would also, like our members have, we're kind of interested in creating a game that is, made by Code Liberation members ourselves. So that would be sort of the mix, I think, of an arcade that we'd be putting forward to the various events happening next year.
Can you cite any success stories that the Code Liberation Foundation has had, either specific developers or games that people could go online and play right now?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of successful members, fortunately. So Nina Freeman definitely is one, and she's quite prominent in the social media scene, so I think everyone would know who she is. She's got her and Jenny Xia have both won awards at the IGF this year. And so Nina was one of our co-founders, and Jenny took classes and participated in all the game jams. Also, Kat Small is another. She's executive director of the group now, and she's got a lot of successful games and is a programmer at SoundCloud. Caroline Cinders, she's UX research designer at IBM Watson. Phoenix Perry, she teaches at Goldsmiths University, and has a whole series of really interesting works and portfolios. So another one of our success stories, I would say, is a young student called Kyra, and she kind of went on to get a scholarship to attend Columbia in the computer science department. Other students becoming members, like Rochelle. She's also creating her own game studio and stuff like that. So a lot of people are kind of in the works, and with this last recent hackathon, quite a few interesting games, and I would say, I guess, creative internet platforms have sort of come out, and we're definitely looking to promote all this. So I don't think we're far from having more sort of younger success stories.
What's one of the best ways that somebody listening to this podcast could help the Code Liberation Foundation?
I would say just kind of reach out, just either on Twitter or through our email, info@codeliberation.org. And I mean, sort of even reaching out to me personally, we're all very responsive on the internet, as you'll probably tell. So that's probably the best way. And also, we have a conference coming up in the next month as part of Creative Tech Week, which is also something brand new for New York, which is a really exciting endeavor to connect, I guess, industry with creative technologists. And that's coming at the end of April towards the first week of May. And so our conference, Facets Con, it's a non-conference, is at the sort of like end of that conference and on the first weekend of May. So that's something you should definitely come to. And almost all our members are going to be there. Me and Caroline will be there, and Phoenix Perry will be flying in. And Kat Small will be there. So just, come and say hi. And definitely love to chat about any ideas or events that you've got coming up or classes that we're going to be running over the summer.
Awesome. The website for that event is creativetechweek.nyc. There will be a link to that in the show notes, as well as a link to the Code Liberation Foundation, which is codeliberation.org. Adelle, before we sign off, I want to do one thing that I've never done on this podcast before.
Okay.
You are one of the leading voices in the art of gamefulness, which is a fascinating field that deserves to be more than just a footnote in this podcast. I'd love to have you back on a future episode to discuss just that. Would you accept that invitation?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, sure. That would be great.
Fantastic. I mean, I was thinking about squeezing it in here, but we just wouldn't be able to do it justice. And I think that if we really get into it, we can do a whole show just on that topic.
Yeah, I would love that. I feel very strongly about that topic, and I love it so much. Everything I make sort of becomes a game or a playful thing. So, definitely lots to talk about.
Wonderful. So subscribers to Polygamer can look forward to hearing more of Adelle later in this calendar year. In the meantime, thank you so much for talking about Code Liberation Foundation. I've really enjoyed finally checking this organization off my list and having somebody on the show. It's been great learning more about the awesome work you do in New York City.
Thank you so much, Ken, for having us. And I'm really excited to have further chats with you. And anybody else listening to this podcast, please get in touch.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.